The room was thick with cigarette smoke, the kind that clung to uniforms and drifted through the corridors of power. A single window looked out onto a city preparing for war, but inside the Reich Air Ministry, a man in a white uniform laughed as he tossed an intelligence report onto the polished table. In that moment, Hermann Goering believed he understood the limits of American industry, and he believed those limits were fixed. A nation of consumers, he thought, could never become a nation of warriors. But beyond the Atlantic, in a place where factory whistles marked the rhythm of ordinary life, something far greater was beginning to stir. Workshops were being cleared, blueprints redrawn, and workers who had never seen an aircraft up close were preparing to build the machines that would decide the future of the world. No one outside a handful of engineers understood the scale of what was coming. It raises a question that echoes across history. What happens when a dictatorship mistakes silence for weakness, or underestimates a democracy that has not yet begun to fight? The answer would be written not on battlefields, but on assembly lines. Factories across the American landscape still carried the quiet hum of peacetime industry when the world around them began to fall apart. In Europe, armored columns carved through France with alarming speed. Radios crackled with urgent reports. Governments collapsed in weeks. And across the Atlantic, the United States watched a continent burn, while its own military remained painfully unprepared for a global conflict. In 1939, America possessed only a modest air corps, a force with 1,700 combat aircraft, many of them relics of the previous decade. On paper, the nation that dreamed of freedom had little ability to defend it. Yet within this vulnerability lay the ignition point of one of the greatest transformations in human history. When Franklin Roosevelt stood before Congress on the 16th of May, 1940, he did not speak like a man constrained by the present. He spoke like someone who understood what the future demanded. His declaration was stark. America, he insisted, must acquire the ability to produce 50,000 airplanes a year. Few believed such a number could ever be achieved. Allies doubted. Opponents scoffed. Even within Washington, the goal seemed untethered from reality. But the president already knew the man he intended to rely upon. William Knudsen, a Danish immigrant who had risen to the presidency of General Motors, answered Roosevelt's call with a decision that stunned the business world. He left his $300,000 salary behind and accepted a single dollar per year to serve the nation that had given him a home. His task was not to build airplanes himself. It was to teach America how to build them in numbers the world had never seen. Knudsen approached the problem as only a master of industry could. He saw factories not merely as buildings, but as living organisms, entities that could be reshaped, restructured, and awakened. Detroit, with its rivers of steel and highways of conveyor belts, would become the heart of the transformation. The great automobile titans were summoned. Ford would build bombers, Chrysler would craft aircraft engines, Packard would produce Merlins. Every corporation that once competed for consumers would now compete for victory. The transition was not smooth. Designs evolved faster than factories could adapt. Materials were scarce. Tooling had to be reinvented. Workers who once built sedans now studied blueprints for four-engine bombers. But as 1940 gave way to 1941, the pulse of American production began to quicken. Routines changed. Shifts extended. The quiet hum of industry became a steady roar. And by December 1941, America was producing 2,000 military aircraft per month, a 20-fold increase in only 2 years. Far from the marble halls of Berlin, where predictions of American weakness were treated as gospel, a new reality was taking shape. The United States, a nation often underestimated for its peaceful habits, was learning the rhythms of war. And still, this was only the beginning. The true test of American industry came not in boardrooms or factory floors, but in the skies over distant continents where metal, fire, and human will collided. By late 1942, the Luftwaffe still believed itself the master of the air. Its pilots had carved their reputations in the early Blitzkrieg campaigns, and many assumed that American aviators would fold under pressure. But in the red sands of Tunisia, Major Johannes Steinhoff witnessed a disturbing reversal. Day after day, new American pilots arrived. Their formations grew larger, their discipline tighter. The amateurs of 1942 were becoming professionals, and the veterans of Germany began to understand a brutal truth. They were being outnumbered and outpaced. That realization deepened as the war pushed northward. Over the industrial city of Schweinfurt, German fighter aces stared upward at bomber streams, stretching from one horizon to the other. Heinz Bahr, a pilot credited with over 200 victories, described the scene as hopeless. 8 German fighters against hundreds of American bombers and their escorts. Even their skill could not overcome arithmetic. When American raids lost 60 bombers in a single day, factory managers simply replaced them within 2 weeks. No European nation had ever waged war with such depth. By early 1944, the conflict reached its decisive crescendo. The operation known as Big Week unfolded between February 20 and 25, when the 8th and 15th Air Forces launched more than 3,500 bomber sorties against German aircraft production. This was not merely a series of raids, it was a strategic dismemberment of the Luftwaffe. Factories burned, supply chains fractured. The Luftwaffe lost between 262 and 355 fighters, but the deeper wound lay in the 100 irreplaceable pilots who vanished from its ranks. Germany could build aircraft, though never fast enough. What it could not rebuild was experience. American production lines produced 2,500 fighters a month, while losing only 400. German factories produced 1,000 fighters a month, while losing 1,200. The math was no longer a contest, it was a verdict. That verdict became visible to the world on the 6th of June, 1944. As Allied ships approached Normandy, 11,590 aircraft guarded the invasion force. Only 319 German sorties rose to challenge them. The sky belonged entirely to the Allies, a vast canopy of Mustangs, Thunderbolts, Lightnings, Fortresses, and Liberators. For the first time in modern warfare, an invasion was executed under nearly complete air supremacy, not because of better tactics, but because one nation had transformed its factories into weapons as powerful as any battleship or tank. In the span of 4 years, the United States had reshaped the air war into a contest defined by endurance and production capacity. The Luftwaffe, once confident in its superiority, now faced an enemy whose strength grew faster than it could be challenged. The battlefield was no longer only above Europe. It extended across assembly lines, drafting tables, and shipping docks thousands of miles away. And in that broader battle space, America could not be stopped. The heart of the American production miracle beat loudest in a place carved out of Michigan farmland. Willow Run was not merely a factory. It was a gamble the size of a small city. Ford engineers envisioned a mile-long assembly line capable of delivering a B-24 Liberator every hour, an ambition so audacious that even seasoned aircraft manufacturers doubted it. When construction began in April 1941, the dream felt larger than the building that tried to contain it. Reality struck quickly. The first bombers that rolled off the line were riddled with flaws. Rivets buckled, wiring snarled, components misaligned. The initial aircraft had to be disassembled and rebuilt almost entirely. Workers joked that Willow Run should be called Will It Run, and critics whispered that the entire project was a costly indulgence. At one point, quality control failures reached nearly 50%. The factory that promised efficiency was drowning in its own ambition. But American industry, like American democracy, proved resilient. Engineers broke the B-24 down into hundreds of sub-assemblies. They reimagined tools, developed hydraulic riveting systems, and introduced prefabricated wiring harnesses that eliminated chaos on the line. The plant absorbed hundreds of design changes in a single year without halting production. Bit by bit, the line stabilized. Workers grew confident. Sections moved with rhythm instead of hesitation. By late 1943, the numbers began shifting. 148 bombers a month, then 365. And finally, in April 1944, Willow Run reached the impossible. 428 B, 24 seconds in a single month, one every 63 minutes, 24 hours a day. This lone factory outproduced the entire German aviation industry. The laughter in Berlin had fallen silent. While America perfected efficiency, Germany retreated underground. The Jaeger program attempted to scatter production across hundreds of hidden facilities. The Mittelwerk complex alone relied on 60,000 forced laborers, many of them prisoners who worked under starvation conditions. 20,000 would die there. Sabotage was common. Parts failed inspection. Transportation delays crippled assembly. Factories built to evade Allied bombers became tombs that produced more misery than machines. The contrast could not have been sharper. In the United States, women stepped into aircraft plants with precision and pride. At Douglas, female inspectors reduced defect rates dramatically. At Willow Run, Rosie the Riveter became a national symbol, driving 3,000 rivets per shift with near-perfect accuracy. American tools were redesigned for smaller hands, unintentionally increasing efficiency. Free workers improved quality, enslaved workers undermined it. By the time Germany fielded its advanced Me-262 jet, the skies were already lost. Technical brilliance could not erase the industrial deficit. Fewer than 200 jets were operational at any time, many grounded by lack of parts or engines that burned out after 10 hours. Meanwhile, America was producing next-generation aircraft, refining designs weekly, and sustaining 2 oceans' worth of war. When the dust settled, the outcome was unmistakable. The turning point of the air war had not been a single battle, but the moment when one nation mastered the art of building faster than its enemy could destroy. Across the world, analysts struggled to understand how a nation once viewed as inward-looking and unprepared had transformed itself into the greatest industrial force in history. From London to Moscow, military observers noted that the American advantage was not simply mechanical. It was cultural. It was political. It was human. Democracies, long dismissed as slow and disorganized, had revealed a capacity for mobilization that dictatorships had never anticipated. Much of that strength came from the American workforce itself. By 1943, 2 million citizens were engaged in aircraft production. Women, who represented less than 1% of the industry in 1941, became 65% of its labor force just 2 years later. Their precision reshaped the very rhythm of manufacturing. At Douglas, female inspectors reduced defect rates from 3.2% to 0.3%. At Willow Run, a single riveter like Rose Monroe could outperform entire inspection teams. These workers were not temporary replacements. They were the backbone of a system that grew more capable every month. The social fabric of the workforce was equally transformative. African Americans, Mexican Americans, Native Americans, immigrants, people with disabilities, teenagers, and elderly citizens entered factories together. Many had never shared a workspace before. Yet in these vast assembly halls, they discovered a collective identity built not on race or class, but on contribution. American factories became a quiet refutation of the racist ideology that guided Germany's war effort. Where the Reich relied on coerced labor, the United States relied on voluntary cooperation, and every metric favored the latter. Globally, the results were impossible to overlook. Allied commanders recognized that American production allowed them to replace losses faster than battles could deplete them. German leaders recognized it too, though in far more painful terms. By late 1944, even Goebbels wrote privately that Goering's promises of air superiority were criminal delusions. Hitler, in a rare moment of candor, admitted that Germany had underestimated the industrial depth of the United States. In the end, the world understood a profound truth. War is not only fought on front lines. It is fought in machine shops, research laboratories, union halls, and neighborhoods where ordinary citizens decide what they are willing to build. The American home front had become a weapon, and the world would never again underestimate its power. In the quiet hours after the war ended, long after the smoke had lifted from Europe's cities, Hermann Goering finally confronted the truth he had spent years denying. Arrested by the U.S. 36th Infantry Division, confined in interrogation rooms far from the grand halls of Berlin, he was shown the numbers that defined the war he had helped unleash. Film reels displayed endless assembly lines. Charts revealed month after month of production that dwarfed the entire Luftwaffe. One American factory, Willow Run, had built more bombers than his Air Force had ever possessed. He stared at the evidence with a silence more revealing than any confession. For Goering, this realization arrived too late. But for the world, it provided a lens through which to understand the true engine of victory. America did not triumph in the air war because of a single battle or a single aircraft. It triumphed because its people, free to choose their path, chose to work. They chose to adapt. They chose to build. A nation that had seemed hesitant in 1940 became an industrial colossus by 1944, powered not by coercion, but by cooperation. The arsenal of democracy proved that production lines could be as decisive as front lines, and that assembly workers could change the course of history as surely as soldiers. This legacy extends far beyond World War II. The organizational systems born on those factory floors shaped the modern world. The engineers who refined bomber assembly lines later designed rockets that reached the moon. The women who riveted B-24 wings raised children who would redefine American industry, science, and civil rights. The very idea that free societies can outproduce dictatorships remains one of the clearest lessons of the 20th century. And so, we return to that moment in 1940, when a man in Berlin laughed at the idea of America building 50,000 planes a year. He could not imagine that democracy, once stirred, could double that number. He could not imagine that ordinary citizens united by purpose rather than force, could bury tyranny under a mountain of steel, aluminum, and willpower. The question, then, is left for us. What does this story teach about the strength of free nations today? And what responsibilities do we inherit from those who proved that production itself can be a form of courage? If you believe these lessons still matter, join the conversation below. Share your thoughts on the next chapter of military history we should explore. The battle may be over, but the history is still being written.